Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another week. We usually do Mentor Mondays on Monday mornings, but actually, what we really felt like we were supposed to do in the month of January is to talk about how you can have your best year ever. And that's exactly what we've called this event, Best Year Ever. As you're making it into the room, here's what I would love for you to do. Go ahead and join us in the chat. Say hello, tell us where you're joining us from. One thing that you're excited about today, that you are feeling momentum on in your life, because we love to be able to connect with you on there. So as you're popping up, we love to see your name and hear from you. So if you would go ahead and start jumping in on the chat and saying hello to us, we would love that. And what have we been talking about actually the last couple of weeks? Well, if you go back in time, what we started talking about a couple of weeks ago was really the finding out what's most important to us. What is the things that are most important? What are the things that are truly driving us? What are the things that are most valuable to us? And what I said last week, as a matter of fact, we'll go ahead and light up the slide for me really quick. This is the thing that I said last week. If you remember, great lives are designed, great lives are created. And it's an intentional process. It is not something that just happens. So really the important things that we had really talked about over the past couple of weeks is that you're going to experience a great deal of pain if you don't really know what's most important. And so being able to go down to the depths of you and figuring out foundationally what are the things that are most important for us in our lives. And you can actually look back at our videos the last couple of weeks so that I don't repeat those kinds of things. Let me say hello to a couple of people who are saying hello to me. Corinne, who's joining us from Georgia. There's Mihai, who's joining us from San Luis Obispo. Welcome, Mihai. Just as you're making it into the room, we always say hello to everyone who's making it into the room. Any kind of input or any kinds of thoughts that you have or comments or whatever, we appreciate it. Also appreciate you hitting the like button or sharing it with other people that you believe could really benefit from it. There's Austin joining us from Arroyo Grande. And here's Beth, who's joining us from Vista, California, usually at work, so I can join you. I'm focused on getting a writing project done. That is excellent. Anybody else that want to say hello just as we're starting and we're welcoming people into the room? See, Irina from New York has made it into the room. Joanna has joined us from New York as well, joining us from Queens. Welcome. Anybody else that wants to say hello really quickly as we're getting ready to jump in? All right. So one of the things that I've always been most compelled with in my life, one of the things that has really been, really for me, a great metaphor for living the best kind of life possible is this whole idea of story. Because what we find is that what makes a really good story is the same thing that actually makes us have a really, really good life. We can actually find the substance within story. And it's been argued that people aren't living the kinds of stories that people used to tell. That's why a lot of times when you're watching movies or particular stories, they usually go back in time. You know why? Because when you go back in time, you find people who are living for something and that they're typically dying for something. And a lot of times these days, well, when you look at a lot of people's lives, they're not necessarily living the same kinds of compelling lives that's probably possible. And what we find is that a lot of people are settling in some kind of way, which is extraordinarily tragic. Anyone who is living and breathing, if you're standing here and you have a pulse in your arm, yes, you do. That means that you have a purpose, that you have a destiny. There's something here on the planet that you're here to do. As a matter of fact, if you're worried about anything that's going on, if you are concerned or you have some kind of anxiety about anything that's going on, then tag you're it. Because the reason why we live into the time that we're living into is not because we're made for a different time. I've heard actually people say this. I felt like I should have been born in the 1800s or in 1950 or something like that, not in this. And I've actually had adults tell me this. Oh, never want to raise kids in a world like this. And it's like, you are literally abdicating your responsibility. Like if there's anything that's going on in the world that is not what it's supposed to be, then you know what? Tag you're it. That means that right now I need to figure out what I'm here on the planet to do. I need to find out what my purpose is, and I need to actually start making decisions to live towards those things as opposed to hanging back in cruise control and watching everything else that's going on. Now, here's the thing that I find about movies, and I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite movies. And forgive me if they seem to have a little bit too much death, destruction, and testosterone or something like that. But I know all of you have your favorite movies. But here's what's true: is that you'll find the exact same components that are the reasons why you like your movies are the same reason why I like mine. Go ahead and light up this slide for me. One of my favorite movies of all time is this movie Braveheart. Now, it's kind of an older movie, but here's what's true about William Wallace is that he came from the least. He did not come from the greatest place. He did not come with an extraordinary background. He did not come with a great name or anything else. He was actually in the least. And as a matter of fact, the place that he's living in was so overwhelmed by England at the time that they didn't even have anything but, I mean, barely even the ground under which they were walking. But what ended up happening in William Wallace is that there was something that took place in his life that triggered a response, and he stepped into what he was made for. Go ahead and light the slide back up for me, because what's true of William Wallace is that he came out of struggle to come into his purpose. And you know what happens at the end of the movie? He dies. That's what actually happens. He dies at the end of the movie. Matter of fact, light the slide back up for me. If I showed you a couple of my other favorite movies, like Gladiator, who finds his purpose. He's living for his wife and kids who he had lost. They were killed, all of this other stuff. And what happens at the end of the movie is he loses everything and he dies. What about this movie? What about this movie? And I got to throw one to everybody else who's being all sentimental and everything else. What about the movie The Notebook? It's two people who are flawed. If you ever watch the movie, my wife and I were watching it a few weeks ago. Wasn't my choice, but sometimes you do what your wife wants you to do. So we're sitting there like watching the movie, and I'm like, these two people are like really messed up. These two people are really dysfunctional. These two people are probably really, really bad for each other. But something happens in their story, and then how does the movie end? Well, the movie ends with them both dying, but they die together, right? What about this movie? If you've ever seen this movie before, it's the movie Rocky. What happens at the end of Rocky? Well, he doesn't die, but he loses. And then we've probably had like 72 sequels since then, but I'm an originalist. I like Rocky 1 and Rocky 2, and I think that they probably should have stopped there, except that there was millions and maybe even billions to be made, so they kept making it. What do you find that's true out of all of these people, out of every one of these stories? Here's what you can find that's true. Here's the first thing. Light this up for me. Is that you must have a compelling vision. You must have a battle that's worth fighting. And what you see in every one of these stories is that there is pain that takes place. But the pain that a lot of people experience in their life makes them withdraw. In every one of these stories, the pain of dysfunction in relationship, the pain of loss, the pain of death, the pain of all of these things stirred something in them. It stirred a hunger inside them, and it began a hunger, started this quest in their life. Every movie that you can think of had a character that probably had flaws in them, and it probably had something that was heartbreaking that happened in their life. But something that happened in their life, something that was tragic, something that would have destroyed most people, instantly turned something on. And you know what? They had a compelling vision. It's not just a vision, it is a compelling vision. It's something that stirs a hunger inside of you. And hunger usually comes from an experience in pain. That's usually the way that there's an origin. And you know that there is a battle that's not only worth fighting, but there is a battle that must be won. On this day today, we celebrate the life of Martin Luther King Jr. One of the things that everyone got behind and understood about this man, and I'll share a little bit about his story that maybe you do or you don't know about his life, is that what really created a movement behind him was not just his charisma, and it was not just his gifting or any of those other things, is that there was a very clear vision a compelling vision that drove him. And the origin of that went way back in his life of pain of his grandfather being a sharecropper and watching his father, who lived very humbly, but he did everything that he could, from his mother to the upbringing that he had in the South and all of these other kinds of things. There was something compelling that shifted on in his life, so that by the time he became an adult, and granted, his entire life, the picture was forming, but he could put it in words, and not just in words, but he painted compelling pictures. This is what a vision is. It's a picture of the future that produces passion. What was the picture? It's very easy. Pretty much every school child in the United States that grew up in the last like 40 years or whatever can actually tell you what the picture looks like. It looked like black children and white children together. That was the picture. Now, you've got to think about what he was doing back in his time. He didn't have social media. He didn't necessarily have a friendly press that was covering him in every kind of way, but somehow, because he knew what he was here on the planet for, he knew the compelling vision that was driving him, and he could eloquently put it into a picture that everybody could have buy-in for. Because he knew what he was fighting for, he was able to write an extraordinary story. See, what most of you don't even think about is that the man was 39 years old when he died. I'm 46. Can you imagine having that kind of an impact, living that kind of a life in 39 short years? And you know what? We live today in the results of the vision that he saw. Here's the crazy thing about his vision. See, not all stories end heroically like we like to think of them, where, hey, you know what? Everybody gets the girl. Everybody gets the job. Everybody gets the house. Everybody gets this. You know what? Sometimes the vision is bigger than you. Sometimes the vision, it actually happens past your existence. Matter of fact, here's what I would argue. Some people would say that Martin Luther King Jr. never actually saw his vision come about. Here's what I would say. I would say that he actually saw it and lived it and embodied it, and it's the reason why so many people entered into it. I mean, you have to think about what his background was, even as an adult and as a professional. You know, some of you have religious backgrounds. A lot of times we go and we have a pastor at a church and they preach a sermon, and it's usually about as far as it goes, you know, and an inspiration, maybe you say this is truth or whatever, but a lot of times you don't see much movement past being up there on stage. Reality was, for his life, is that he became the embodiment of the very thing that he would actually speak of, the very thing that he spoke into. It's almost as though he actually spoke something into existence. You know what a lot of the other people were saying that were actually his colleagues of that day? You know what? One day, I know it sucks. I know how bad life is right now, but you know what? One day we're going to die and we'll be in heaven and we won't have to deal with this pain anymore. You know what that vision did? That vision painted a picture for people to live into the same kind of life every day, to tolerate what was going on, even though it was wrong. But the reality was, for Martin Luther King Jr., is that when he saw something and he actually lived into it, and he brought people into the expressed reality of it. Because you know what? You see your picture, you're brought to life. It gives you sustenance. It awakens you. It helps you live into the zone. It does everything for you in that moment when you know what you're here on the planet to do, and you know that there is a fight that you've got to be in. There is a battle that must be won, rather than saying, hey, one day we're going to be in heaven. What Martin Luther King Jr. said is that, hey, you know what? If it's like this in heaven, then it really should be here on earth. Hey, it's not okay. We are equal. We're equal there. We should be equal here. And you know what? I know things aren't perfect, right? But in one generation, I don't know if you've thought about this, one generation, we go from segregation to an African American in the White House. That's extraordinary. In one generation. And granted, he's not the only person behind the civil rights. I understand this, but he's definitely the leader, the modern leader, as we would really know of what he stood for. And in 39 years, he's able to live into that. Here's the next thing. Let me show you this slide. Second thing that you're going to find in all of these stories is that you must be imperfect and you've got to be willing to be transformed. What do I mean by that? I think a lot of people take a step back and don't live into the kind of life that they could have lived into because they're so worried about when everything else changes and when other people change, then that's going to be my cue that I can actually live my best life. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of people actually settle in their life. So you'll meet some couples and they love each other. They have an amazing relationship in the beginning years, maybe that first 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or whatever. But at a certain point, all of their gripes and all of their beefs come down to that the problem is actually the other person. And when they start changing, then we'll have an amazing life. Not knowing that they have actually their own imperfections, that they settled and they became tolerant. Even for some of you who'd say, hey, I've got a good marriage. Why don't you have an amazing marriage? Why have you settled? Is it possible that in your life, rather than you choosing to be the one who changes, that you're waiting on the world to change and to catch up? I'll show you this old TV show that my kid used to watch when I was growing up, and I hated this show. Some of you may remember this. They actually quit making it some years ago, and it's called the Teletubbies. Now, if you see in the picture there, the Teletubbies, every day, if you ever watched it, light that slide back up for me. If you ever watched it, the Teletubbies would come out of their hole after the sun came up, which is a baby. And the baby would like be smiling, and then everybody would get up and they would stretch, and then they would do a bunch of, things, purposeless things for the rest of the show. And then you know what would happen at the end? Is that the baby, the son, would actually, there would be a sunset, and then everybody gets tired and they go back into the hole. That's Teletubbies. Every show starts, ends the same way, and none of the characters ever change. That's not a good story. But what happens for us is that a lot of us don't really change. I mean, we change, but we're not necessarily purposefully changing, because change requires pain. Change requires that I'm going to have to confront some things. I'm going to have to go to some comfortable places. The reason why someone has a good marriage versus an amazing marriage is because a good marriage is comfortable, but an amazing marriage is going to cause friction. It's going to cause pain. Anything that's in your life right now means that you've got to confront the fact that every one of us are a work in progress. No one has all their ducks in a row. No one is perfect. And the quicker that you actually grab a hold of the fact that you are imperfect, but I am committed to my own transformation. I don't know if you've ever seen transformation before, but it's usually a pretty gross process. If you've ever watched a caterpillar go from like a butterfly, they literally like turn into like this slimy stuff in a cocoon before they actually become something. And transformation usually happens in one of two different places, but usually you find these two things together. One of them is a pivotal life experience. Some of you who have been in my boot camp have actually heard me teach about this. Is that transformation comes out of a pivotal life experience, and it also usually comes out of a relationship. Usually both of those things are happening. If you think of any defining moment when you've had real change, is that there's a pivotal life experience. There was a choice. You left, you moved, you got back together, you got married, you got divorced, you had a baby, you changed jobs. All of these things. You lost a job, you moved to a different country, you lost someone in your life. I told you guys a couple of weeks ago that in December, we unexpectedly lost my father-in-law, like out of nowhere, and then he's just gone. And even for me during this time, is that we're trying to, we've had tragedy, we've had loss. Unfortunately, my wife and I have dealt with a ton of different tragic events in our life. Everything from losing family members to losing babies to the recession that hit a lot of you guys. And what ended up happening for us is that who do we get to become? That is the question that we get to ask. Who do we get to be now that we never could have been before this moment? You don't have to wait on a pivotal life experience. You can actually create one in your life, which leads me to point number 3, which is this, is that in the story, to write a great story, to live into a great story, you're going to have to write the script. What do I mean by writing the script? Well, here's what I mean by that. I said a while ago is that the hunger to change and to have something for most people, most of the people who live significant lives, who live really huge lives and have lived the kinds of lives that we want to live, usually it was pain that created hunger in their life. And I don't know if you guys have ever had hunger before, but I think that they actually created the Snickers commercial, the one where it's like, hey, they show the people who are hangry, and they go from like this weird looking person to they eat a Snickers and then they go back to normal. I'm one of those kinds of people. For those of you who have ever been hangry, and anybody who's like really honest, that you can just throw it on the chat really quickly, that you can say, yes, I have been hangry. I'm one of those people who get hangry. Or some of you, if you're somebody who is like, yeah, I actually get hangry, go ahead and throw that into the chat, and also just like hit like or heart and say, yes, I am one of those people who gets really hangry. Here's the thing, is that when you are hangry, there is nothing that's going to keep you from getting what you want in your life. That all that you can think about, all that you are compelled by, everything that is driving you in that moment is that you have got to stop what it is that you're feeling right now in this moment. And that drives you. It moves you into that place. Well, here's the other thing. Is that the other thing that we have to understand is that the pain that is going on in our life at any given moment can be turned to drive us towards something, or it can be used to make an excuse for why we don't have what we want in our life. I mean, how many people are waiting not only for other people to change, but they're waiting on the world to change, or they're waiting on somebody to move so that they can be given permission to go after something in their life, or they just hang their excuses on the way that their parents raised them, that something that was done to them, that something hurt them, or any number of things. For me in my life, my daughter several weeks ago, we were just hanging out in the kitchen. She had one of her friends over. We love her friend to death. She's amazing. But they were in the kitchen, and there's been a lot of different things that have been going on, like politically, and my kids are aware of things that are going on in our life, right? Well, her friend actually started bashing the United States and saying, well, I don't want anybody to even know that I'm from the United States. I'd go live somewhere else, whatever. And my daughter's just kind of like, yeah, okay. But my daughter just didn't really say anything or react to it. And we all just kind of let it happen, because I don't think that everything's a teaching moment for other people's kids or whatever. But in the next couple of days, my daughter and I were talking, and I was like, hey, we love your friend. We think she's amazing, all of this other stuff. But I hope you never say anything foolish as what country you live in or anything else. For those of you who have never put two and two together, the last name Dabdu is not a typical American name, right? So, I mean, we've only been here about not even 100 years. My family immigrated. I'm first generation born in this country. And we have the house still in our family's name in Louisiana, where so many of the Dabdus who immigrated from the Middle East actually came through there, cousins, different people who lived in that house for a short while. And the little that my grandparents did have, they would make beans or rice or whatever they had to do, but that they actually came here because they knew that they didn't have the freedom to be who they wanted to be, to take the script into their hands and begin to write it. And I told my daughter, I was like, hey, I know things aren't perfect. There's a lot of things that are hurtful, that are painful, and everything else. Hey, I know I get harassed trying to go through security in the airport, and it's the only people in the world who know how to pronounce Dabdu are TSA agents. I have no idea why, but they're the people who always know. In spite of all of those things, I always I reminded my daughter, I was like, listen, if I brought you back to your country of origin, you wouldn't even be allowed to drive a car. You wouldn't even be able to wear the clothes that you want to wear, because you would be seen as a person of less value and worth. And despite all of the imperfections and different things that we live into, I know that all of you, listen, I know some of you have been been wronged, you had bad parents, you had a bad mom, you had a bad dad, you lived in a bad city, you had a bad whatever that was going on. We don't have control of the people that we're born into, and we don't have control over where we were born or anything else. But what I do have control over is the ownership that I get to take in my life. That regardless of anything that has happened to me in my life, I have the ability at any moment in my life that there is another chapter, and I'm the one who's writing my story. I don't care what anybody has spoken over my life, and I've been one of those people who was told that you are dirt, that you don't matter, that your voice doesn't matter, to the point that I hated my own voice. I could show you on the walls in my office the different things that I look at, even in the studio today, that I can look to the left of me and I have a sound wave. It's like a vocalization that's on a picture. And it reminds me that every time that I look at it, is that actually my voice not only is my moneymaker, but it's literally the doorway to other people's dreams. That I understand that sometimes the things that happened to me in my life were not what my purpose was, and it's not the end of my life. I had to, at a certain point, say that those voices that were being spoken over me don't have more power than my own voice, and begin to take the pen and write my own script, because I can tell a different story about my life. Listen, it's a much better story if you had your butt kicked at life and you were able to overcome it, rather than saying, because this has happened to me in my life, I have an excuse for not being more and doing more and playing it safe. Listen, if you've been a person who's lost everything, you know how it feels. Now you've got the ability with that to never be fearful again, to live into the kind of life that you're actually made to live into. Now, here's the next point. You must have worth that can't be lost or stolen. And what do I really mean by that? Well, here's what I mean by that. Let me show you this next slide. In honor of Martin Luther King Jr., and you can look up, he's got an extraordinary story. So if you've never looked up his history and his story, here's one of this experience that Martin Luther King Jr. had when he was in high school, where he would not be allowed to run in the front of the right in the front of the bus. And here's what he said. He says, I would end up having to go to the back of that bus with my body, but every time I got on that bus, I left my mind up on the front seat. And I said to myself, one of these days, I'm going to put my body up there where my mind is. This is a really important thing that I don't know that most people understand, is that it goes beyond just being able to take control of your script. It's a thing that we call, and a lot of people want to teach self-worth and everything else, but I think that most of the people who try to teach self-worth are trying to convince themselves of their own self-worth. This is a man who grew up in a segregated South, who, if you read the stories, his mom had a way of speaking to him to say, you need to be a somebody and to know that you are not less than anyone else. But see, the reality is that when you grow up in a place where you're not allowed to go freely to one place to another, to have to change buses and in a certain place, to not be able to go to the same school, to not be able to go to a park, and all of these other kinds of things, at a certain point, you start being convinced of the circumstances. You start being convinced of what other people are speaking over your life. Except that in this instance, this is not hype and it's not bogus. What he's saying here is that what he truly emulated in his life is that his mind was not on the back of the bus, is that his mind, where his worth, where his value was coming from, is that he always knew that he belonged at the front of the bus. I don't know how many of us can really say that, because here's what you need to understand, is that if the thing that you are compelled by today to go after in your life, you're trying to go after it because you have offense in your heart, because you have been hurt, or something happened to you, and now you got something to prove. You ever see that? You ever see these stupid memes that I watch coaches put on Instagram all the time? Prove all your haters wrong. I don't really give a damn about my haters. I really don't. You know why I don't? Because I don't value what they have to say. If they hate me, we don't have anything to talk about. Problem with your haters is, and when you have offense in your heart, is you keep dragging these people around and you can't run fast. And here's the other thing, is that if the thing that you are compelled by in your life has offense and it has pain to prove something, you are always going to hit a wall. And I'll add this as well. If you are coming from lack, that you don't know what your worth is, that you don't know what your value is, you know what will happen is that you will achieve your mission, you will achieve your goal, you will get to that spot, whether it's anger or hurt or angst or pain, whatever is driving you to that point. See, it's okay to be hurt and it produce a hunger in you, but that can't be the thing that drives you. It wasn't the thing that drove MLK Jr. either. Is that there has to be a wholeness in you. There has to be value in you. You know why? Because if you accomplish what you think is your purpose, you will still end up in lack. That's the problem of it. Is that if you start with lack, you are not going to suddenly get it. When you get to the end, you're still going to be in lack. And you'll still be trying to prove something because there's emptiness in you. You know what you have to do is, when it comes to worth, and this is the probably the most important lesson that I learned in my entire life, is that you have to have a voice over your life that speaks worth, value, love, promise, and it is not based on anything that you do. If you need anybody in the world, if you've never heard this before in your life, let me be the first to tell you, is that you are not valuable because of what you do, but you are valuable because of who you are. You are not a human doing, you are a human being. The fact that you are breathing air, that you were born into this world, regardless of where you come from or anything else, it's significant, and it's because you have extraordinary value. When you're not working for, but you are working from, it has a completely different motivation. It is a completely different end game. You know what? When you know that you are valuable, when you know that you are successful, when you know that you have value and worth and all of that stuff is settled, here's another thing that you don't have is fear, because there's nothing that can be taken from you. There is nothing that can be stolen from you. There is nothing that can be lost. And so something in us to live this best life, to live the best year ever, means that we have to come in to true value and worth. And it needs to be an unshakable voice. It needs to be a voice that when you pull back the layers, it does not change its mind about you. And here's what I'll tell you, is that most human love is conditional. You'll lose your friends, you'll lose your family, you'll lose all this. You're going to have to find the voice that does not change about you. Otherwise, you're going to be a roller coaster ride for the rest of your life. And you'll always have fear that'll be stopping you from being able to move in and make the decisive choices you need to make. Fear is always going to be kind of like a present kind of thing. But if you're afraid of people and you're afraid of being rejected, or you're afraid of something that you're going to be lost, you're going to lose, like your own acceptance or whatever, you're always going to be limited, and you're always going to have a govern on your life. Here's the last thing. 5 is this, is that you've got to take decisive action. And it's important to actually understand what decisive action is. When I say decisive action, I'm not talking about just taking action. You know that I talk to thousands of aspiring coaches every year. You know that last year, we're again the largest life coach training program in North America. We had over 1,000 new coaches graduate last year. It's amazing. It's an amazing feat as far as all those things are concerned. But out of all the thousands of people that I talk to, you know that most people won't actually take the step, won't actually take they might take something free, they might read some books, they might watch some YouTube videos or whatever, but when it actually comes to a decisive action, see, what a lot of people think is that if I read a bunch of books about it, if I watch a bunch of videos about it, or stir whatever I'm stirring up, that it means that I'm taking action. That's not real action. When I say decisive action, when I say decisive, it means that something drastically has changed. The game is completely changed. Let me show you this on this slide. There's a way that you can always tell that someone's taken decisive action. One is that the action ups the ante and it changes the game for this person from then on. You might have actually heard me talk about the word decision. The three letters in the middle of decision are the letters CIS. It's to cut. It literally means to kill. It means that you burn your bridges. And what I watch a lot of people do is they'll take this step, but it's a safe step. It's not really a decisive step, because what they do is they keep their bridge so that they can go back to it. Now, I'm not talking about burning bridges with people, and I'm also not necessarily talking about going and quitting your job and just going out like, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and then I'm going to do this. What I am talking about is that sometimes people say, well, I've got a plan A and I've got a plan B, but when they live plan B, that their life hasn't really changed. Plan B even is, plan B is not, I'm going back to who I was before. I'm going back to doing whatever I was going to do before. See, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested 39 times. Now, some of this stuff, if you look at some of the charges, were absolutely ridiculous kinds of stuff that he got. I think one time he got arrested for going 5 miles over the speed limit. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not really interested in being arrested. I'm not being arrested 5 times. I'm not being interested in being arrested 1 time. And 1 time is going to teach me my lesson, right? Because that's what it's designed to do. Because when you go after your purpose and go after this thing, the reason why there's going to be so much change that's going on in your life is that there will be opposition. Some of it's going to be on the outside, but most of it's going to actually be internally. So when you get arrested the first time, the second time, the third time, at what point do you say, you know what, I could go back to my church where I'm pastoring and everybody loved me there and I'm getting a nice salary and I have a whole heritage of all this. Like, this is what he could have chosen to do, except that every time that it happened, see, if you haven't made decisive action, and I'm talking about decisive action means in the depths of you, there is a decision made that I cannot go back to the life that I was living before, and I cannot go back to who I was before. This is the kind of decision. And here's how you know, is that it ups the ante and it changes the game forever. You know that once he made that decision, there was no going back. And here's the other thing, is that the people who take decisive action never stop taking action. That's how you know that someone has made a decisive action in their life. So like for some of the people who talk to me about wanting to break into coaching and those kinds of things, if they are not coaching today and they're not even in the game, then I know that they never took a decisive action, even if they went to training, even if they got certified, even if they did any number of things. You know how many times that I would go to coach training events myself and attend and see people who have been certified coaches for 10 years, more training, more certifications and everything else than I ever dreamed of having, but they'd never had a client before. You know why? Because they're not taking decisive action. Decisive action means you're going to have to go to the places where you are uncomfortable. Some of us stay in comfortable places where we have a lot of success and then we say, oh, I don't have time for these other things because family is number 1 priority, because this is number 1 priority. I totally get that. My family is number 1 priority. I live that. But you know something else, and something that I think I said even last week, is that your family or anybody that you love should not mean that you're playing a smaller game with your life. It should give you roots and it should give you wings. That you always know what your priority is, and you always know where maybe the people in your life that you have the most allegiance to and those kinds of things. But it also should give you wings. It should be the very things that you begin to go after in your life because you know that you're solid. Because if you know, if God gives you people who love you, who will fight with you and all those other things, even that much more that you should be living into a life and have no excuses. This is the way that we live into the best year ever, is to begin to write the kinds of stories that we want to live. I mean, look at your life right now. This is really easy. Look at your life. Would you watch a movie about your life? Would you read a book about your life? And it's not a judgmental thing that I'm saying. Is that there's got to be points in our life when we look and we say, hey, you know what? I'm not really being heroic here. I realize that I don't have a compelling vision. I don't have a picture of something that I'm living for. Sit down. What must happen? What should happen? Those are the kinds of things that you need to know. Where have I settled in my own change and transformation? And I've acted like other people needed to change or the world needed to get its stuff together. Where am I laying blame instead of taking a hold of the script and writing it for myself? Those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask. What kind of a life do you want to live? Are you ready to take the script? You have that power. Every day of your life, you have that choice that you get to make. And I'm challenging you to go after it. Live that kind of life that you want to read about. Everybody who's ever lived that kind of life, you know what? They always had threats of losing something. They always had opposition, internal and external. This is how we kind of live the kind of life that we want to live. Let me say hello to a few people who I'm sure made it into the room. Let's see. There's Tony, welcome. Appreciate that. And there's Albert. Hey, it's been a while. Hey, and there's Penny. Welcome, Penny. I appreciate that. Austin says, I get undercover hangry. I you know what? For me, I pretty much honestly tell people I'm hangry. I just kind of tell people, I'm like, hey, nothing personal, but you are in the way of me actually eating something right now. And that's usually what I'll say to people. Let's see. There's Monica. There's Amanda. Welcome, Amanda. I see Alexandra from Utah. Elise from Toronto. Hey, you guys, do me a huge favor as you guys are still here. Like this post, share it. That way that it tells Facebook and YouTube that we're doing a good job. So if this has been really helpful for you, inspiring in any kind of way, do us a huge favor and like it or share it or leave a comment. That's what we always look for, is that kind of engagement to know that we're actually doing a good job. All right. Anybody else that I want to say hello to? There's Diane. Hey, Diane. Yolanda. Welcome, Yolanda. And Monica's in the house from Oklahoma. Awesome. Somebody was telling me just today how amazing Oklahoma is. And it's the one state, one of about 8 or 10 states that I have not been to yet. And I don't know why. It's just never brought me there. But all right. Penny says, love the where have I settled in my own transformation. Awesome. I appreciate that. Very good. Well, do us a huge favor again. Share this post with somebody that could really benefit from it. And we always appreciate your feedback. I appreciate you guys spending your Monday night on this special night, MLK Junior Day. And I hope in some way that I have actually honored him. And I would encourage you, take some time, read his story, read his history, read some of not just his speeches, but read where he came from. And you know what? You'll pick out every one of these things of story out of his own life. And hopefully that will inspire you. Let me say hello to a few more people. Fran, hello from South Carolina. Alicia, hey, how's it going, Alicia? And let's see, Justice. Oh, I love that name. Justice from Vancouver, British Columbia. That's a lot of pressure if you're born with the name Justice, right? Like, you have to do something with your life if your name's Justice. If your name's Paul, I didn't feel like the pressure on me. Like most of the people who get the name Paul, I mean, there's a few significant ones out there. Some people say Paul Revere or Paul McCartney or Pope John Paul or whatever, but a lot of those people, that's not even what their real name was. They changed their name. But man, Justice is like a legit name. That is awesome. Albert says strong talk. I appreciate that. Awesome. Well, listen, everyone, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you guys all immensely. Have a great rest of your week and take care.